Before we go any further, one thing needs to be clear. The word stages can sound neat, clean, and orderly, like one step ends and the next one begins in a straight line. But almost nothing about a narcissist's inner world is neat, straight, or predictable. So when I say stages, I do not mean a perfect sequence that always moves at the same speed. I mean a pattern of inner experiences they move through after they lose someone important to them. Sometimes they move through these experiences fast, sometimes it takes months, sometimes they jump backward without warning. And sometimes they live in 2 or 3 of these states at the same time in a way that looks like total confusion from the outside. But underneath it, there is still a pattern. There is still a system. And once you understand that system, a lot of their behavior starts making uncomfortable sense. That is the part most people never get to see. Most content focuses only on the outside behavior, the hoovering, the anger, the smear campaign, the new relationship, the public image, but that is only the surface. Under the behavior sits a much more fragile psychology, and that deeper layer explains far more than the actions ever could. If you have ever wondered how someone can act cold 1 minute, obsessed the next, and then suddenly cruel without any clear reason, stay with me, because this is where it starts to connect. And what you may realize by the end is this. What looked random was never really random. It had a hidden logic, a painful one, a revealing one. And if you understand that logic, you stop blaming yourself for the chaos they created. That matters more than you think. So let's begin with the first experience they go through, because it is usually the one that catches almost everyone off guard. And no, it is not rage, not first. That is what most people expect. But the real beginning is quieter, colder, and in some ways far more disturbing. Right after the loss, especially if the person leaving was a major source of emotional supply. What often appears first is not panic, not revenge, and not collapse. It is silence. It is a strange, cool, almost eerie kind of composure. They go on with life as if nothing serious happened. They post casually. They speak to mutual people with no visible pain. They move through the day with a face that says, I am fine. This means nothing. I never needed this anyway. And if you are the one who left, that image can cut deeply. It can confirm every fear you carried during the relationship. Maybe I never mattered. Maybe it was all fake. Maybe I was replaceable before I even walked away. But what looks like calm is not calm. What looks like indifference is not indifference. What you are actually seeing is a defense system turning on at full power. They are not processing the loss. They are refusing it. In real time, they begin rewriting the meaning of what happened so they do not have to feel its full weight. They shrink your importance inside their own mind. They reduce the relationship. They reduce your role. They create a version of the story where this was never as deep, never as meaningful, and never as necessary as it really was. And here is the key part. This is usually not a fully conscious performance at first. Later, yes, it can become strategic, but in the beginning, it is defensive. It is psychological survival. It is the only move available to a person whose entire inner structure depends on not feeling too much vulnerability at once. So if they looked unmoved, that does not always mean they were untouched. Sometimes it means the opposite. And that first cold silence is not proof that you meant nothing. In many cases, it is proof that what happened hit a place in them they do not know how to handle. That first defense does not last forever. It starts breaking the moment reality begins slipping through the story they created, and reality usually enters through absence. Not only the big obvious things like praise, attention, or emotional energy, though those matter too. It enters through the small things, the unnoticed things, the details they never counted while you were there because they had grown used to them, the way you responded when they talked, the way you understood their moods, the way you remembered tiny preferences they never had to explain twice, the kind of care that becomes part of daily life so quietly that it is only fully felt when it disappears. When that absence starts shaping the day, the first defense weakens. The story of not caring starts cracking, and that is when the next experience begins. It is panic, not open panic, not visible panic. You are not likely to see them trembling or admitting fear. Their relationship with vulnerability is far too damaged for that. But inside, a disorienting realization starts growing. This is bigger than they thought. The supply gap is real. The loss has depth. The person they minimized is still affecting the shape of their life. And from this point, the monitoring begins. This is often where the hoovering impulse is born, even if they do not act on it right away. They start checking. They look at your social media more than their public indifference would ever suggest. They ask mutual contacts questions wrapped in fake casualness. They want updates. Are you okay? Are you sad? Are you thriving? Are you dating? Are you speaking about them? They are not doing this from healthy love. They are doing it like someone touching a wound again and again just to measure how deep it goes. They want to know what the damage really is, and the answer they often find is not soothing. In fact, what they learn during this quiet watching often pushes them straight into the next and loudest state of all. And if you have lived this, you already know what that looks like. Then comes the rage, and this rage is not ordinary heartbreak. It is not the kind of anger most people feel after a painful ending. It is not grief searching for a place to land. It is narcissistic injury turning outward as aggression. That is why it feels so sharp, so personal, and so extreme. The intensity often shocks people because it does not match the public story they were telling before. If they did not care, why are they suddenly so angry? If the relationship meant so little, why are they putting in this much energy to destroy your image? But that is exactly the point. The smear campaign that often begins here is not random. It is targeted, it is precise. They use the things they know about you from years of access and closeness. They go after your reputation, your trust, your credibility with shared people. They take private truths and twist them into weapons. They turn your vulnerability into evidence against you, and that cruelty is not accidental. It serves a very specific function. This stage is not mainly about punishing you, though it absolutely can do that. It is about restoring control over the story. You're leaving, especially if you left calmly and clearly, told a truth they could not tolerate. It suggested that they were the problem. It suggested that you saw what was happening and stepped out of it. The rage is an emergency attempt to rewrite that truth before it settles, before other people believe it, before even they have to face it. And the most revealing part is how disproportionate it becomes. That overreaction tells the real story. Even the people being pulled into their version of events often sense that something is off. The anger is too big, too intense, too relentless, and that excess exposes what they are trying so hard to hide. It shows destabilization. It shows loss. It shows that your absence landed harder than they ever planned for it to. In a strange and painful way, this may be the most honest message they send after the relationship ends. Not because it is kind, not because it is fair, but because buried underneath all the damage is one uncomfortable truth: you mattered. After enough anger burns through, something changes again. The noise fades. The attacks may slow down. The public drama may cool. But what comes next is not the same silence as before. The first silence was built like armor. It was a performance of not caring. This silence is different because there is less energy left to perform. The rage took a lot out of them. And once it loses force, there is sometimes nothing immediate to replace it. No new story, no fresh distraction strong enough, no move that fully fixes the emptiness. And that is when they can move into something that from the outside looks like finally moving on. They may appear settled, they may look busy, they may seem adjusted to the life they built after the breakup. But internally, something heavier can be happening. This is the closest thing their psychology comes to grief. It is not healthy grief. It is not named grief. It is not processed grief. But it is still a form of loss pressing against a system that has no room for honest mourning. To call it grief would mean admitting something important was lost. To admit something important was lost would mean admitting something outside themselves truly mattered. And their defenses are built to resist that admission at all costs. So the feeling stays trapped and unnamed. It comes out as restlessness, irritability, a dull dissatisfaction with life, a heaviness they cannot explain. They do not trace it back honestly, because that would require self-awareness they are structurally unable to hold for long. This is also where a replacement relationship begins showing its limits. The new person may offer attention, praise, and fresh emotional fuel, but that does not mean they offer true depth. They were often chosen quickly for access and supply, not for deep compatibility. So while the new connection may fill the noise, it does not fill the deeper space left behind. And that is when the ghost of what was lost starts moving quietly in the background. The new relationship, if there is one, begins to feel thinner than expected. The attention still comes, but it does not land the same way. The admiration may still be there, but it does not truly satisfy. The narcissist may not say this out loud, and they may not even fully understand it themselves, but something feels off, something feels less nourishing than it should. And because they cannot accurately identify the source of that emptiness, they do what they have always done. They shift the problem onto the nearest available person. The new partner starts receiving the same devaluation that damaged every major relationship before. Irritation grows. Criticism creeps in. The familiar pattern restarts. This is the cycle repeating itself, and it has likely repeated through many relationships before yours. But this time there is often an extra edge, a kind of haunting, because the person who left, clearly, the one who saw through the pattern, can linger in the background of their mind in a way they cannot fully erase. That memory makes the present feel flatter. It makes the new supply feel weaker. It makes the performance of their current life more effortful than before. And eventually, that pressure pushes them toward action. They decide to do something about that ghost. They decide to test whether the old source is still available. This is where the re-entry attempt begins. Sometimes it comes through a mutual person who has quietly been kept around as an information line. Sometimes it comes as a social media move designed to look accidental but feels far too calculated to really be random. Sometimes it is a direct message written in a soft, vulnerable tone that looks spontaneous on the surface but is actually a carefully shaped probe. They are not simply reaching out because they miss you in a healthy way. They are testing access. They are asking without asking, is the door still open? Is the supply still reachable? Has your clarity softened? Has time made you lonely enough to reconsider what you already knew? This is the hoovering impulse finally taking form, and it can be one of the most emotionally dangerous moments in the whole cycle. When they return, they rarely come back as the angry version from the smear campaign. They usually come back as the version you once loved. Warm, attentive, present, soft-eyed, deeply interested. It can feel almost unreal because it mirrors the beginning so closely. The early charm comes back. The focus returns. The words sound right. The emotional tone seems sincere. And in a limited way, there is sincerity there. They really do want something back. They genuinely feel the absence of what you gave them. They genuinely want relief from the discomfort that has been building inside. That is why the performance can feel so convincing. It is not always fake in the shallow way people imagine. It is often powered by a real desire. The problem is that the desire is still centered on supply, regulation, and control, not on mutual truth or lasting change. That is what makes this stage so risky. It speaks directly to the part of you that remembers the good moments, the part that still carries the old bond in your body. The part that worked hard to build a life without them, but is not completely numb to what once felt meaningful. If you have ever felt yourself soften when someone returned in exactly the tone you had secretly longed for, you know how powerful this can be. And that is why this stage is so dangerous. It targets the gap between your healing and your longing. It finds the distance between who you are becoming now and who you used to be with them, and it presses right there, not always with evil planning in every second, but with a deep instinct for where your emotional openings still live. And if you are not careful, the return can feel like proof that everything mattered in the way you hoped it did, but that is not always what it means. Sometimes it only means the cycle has found another way back in. And if you are still here, stay with me, because this is the moment where understanding can protect you more than hope ever will. What makes this so hard is that the returning version can sound reflective. They may seem softer, they may act like they finally understand what went wrong. They may bring just enough sadness, just enough honesty, and just enough emotional memory to make you wonder if this time is different. They might say the right words. They might remind you of private moments. They might speak with a kind of broken tenderness that feels almost impossible to fake. And this is where many people get pulled back, not because they are weak, but because they are human. Because when someone once mattered deeply, a familiar voice can reopen things you thought were closed. But what often sits underneath this contact is still the same basic need: relief, access, validation, regulation. The return is less about building something new and more about calming the inner instability created by the loss. That is why the pattern can restart even when the re-entry feels emotional and real. Once contact is restored, the old structure tends to come back with it. The idealization, the closeness, the sense of being seen, then the subtle control, then the tension, then the confusion, then the erosion. And the most painful part is that the person on the receiving end may already know this and still feel shaken by the return. That is how strong the emotional imprint can be. So if you ever wondered why someone who acted cold, then cruel, then silent, can suddenly reappear with softness and longing, it is not because the earlier stages were fake and this one is finally true. It is because all of it belongs to the same system: the indifference, the panic, the rage, the quiet heaviness, the return. Each part serves a purpose inside their psychology. And once you see that, you stop reading each new move as a separate mystery. You begin to see the whole machine. That does not erase the pain, but it can save you from giving the latest version of them more meaning than it deserves. And sometimes that shift is the beginning of real freedom. If any part of this feels uncomfortably familiar, trust that feeling. Your clarity is not cruelty. Your distance is not failure. Sometimes walking away is the first honest thing that happened in the entire relationship. And here is the final truth running through all of this. A narcissist losing you is not a simple breakup story. It is a threat to the structure they built around themselves. That is why the reactions can look so mixed, so dramatic, and so hard to understand. They may act untouched, then obsessed. They may act superior, then wounded. They may attack you, replace you, watch you from a distance, then return as if nothing happened. But these are not random contradictions. They are the outward signs of an inner system trying to survive a loss it cannot fully admit. The first move is to shrink the meaning of what happened. The second is to feel the panic of what is missing. The third is to attack the source of the injury and seize back control of the story. The fourth is to sit in an unnamed dissatisfaction that feels like grief but cannot be spoken as grief. The fifth is to reach back toward the old source when the present is no longer enough. And through all of it, the same truth keeps leaking through, even when they do everything possible to hide it. The loss had weight. Your presence had weight. And that is why the reaction is so intense. But this is the part one needs you to hear clearly. Someone reacting strongly to your absence does not automatically mean they loved you in a healthy way. Intensity is not the same as care. Pursuit is not the same as accountability. Pain is not the same as growth. A person can feel your loss deeply and still remain unable to love you safely. That is a hard truth, but it is also a freeing one. Because once you stop measuring meaning only by how strongly they react, you can start measuring reality by something else. By consistency, by respect, by honesty, by repair, by peace. And if those things were missing, then their return does not change the core truth of what you lived through. So if you needed one more sign not to confuse emotional force with real change, let this be it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is understand the pattern well enough that it no longer has the power to pull you back into it.